The fluorescent lights buzz overhead in the packed congressional hearing room, but you can barely hear them over the electric tension crackling through the air. Cameras line the walls like soldiers at attention. Every seat is filled, every phone is recording, the kind of moment that doesn't just make headlines, it rewrites them. Representative Jasmine Crockett sits at the witness table, her posture straight as a steel rod, her dark blazer impeccable despite the chaos swirling around her. Across the room, the legendary Maxine Waters holds court, her silver hair perfectly styled, her voice booming with decades of political authority. This isn't just another hearing. This is a collision between generations, between old guard power and new wave accountability. The air itself seems to vibrate. You know something's about to break. Waters has just finished another one of her trademark speeches about ethics and responsibility, her finger jabbing the air like a conductor's baton. The usual political theater, the usual carefully rehearsed outrage. But something's different today. There's a storm brewing behind Crockett's eyes that Waters hasn't noticed yet. Since we're talking about accountability, Crockett's voice cuts through the chamber like a blade through silk. The room doesn't just go quiet, it goes dead. Every breath stops, every heartbeat pauses. Her gaze locks onto Waters with laser precision. Should I mention what really happened at the Waters home last summer? Time freezes. The question hangs in the air like a loaded weapon nobody saw coming. Waters' confident smile falters for just a fraction of a second, but the cameras catch it all. The press corps leans forward as one organism, sensing blood in the water. Congressional aides frantically tap on their phones, already crafting the tweets that will set the internet ablaze. Then the dam breaks. The room explodes into chaos. Shouts erupt from every corner. Chairs scrape against marble floors as people leap to their feet. Cameras flash like lightning strikes. The gavel pounds uselessly as parliamentary order dissolves into pure, raw human reaction. This isn't politics anymore. This is primal drama unfolding in real time. A revelation so shocking it made the room explode and left reputations hanging by a thread. Waters sits frozen, her legendary composure cracking like ice under pressure. Crockett remains perfectly still, watching the hurricane she's just unleashed with the calm of someone who knew exactly what they were doing. The crowd's roar grows louder, angrier, more desperate for answers. But how did things escalate to this public atomic moment, and what dark family secret did everyone miss? Until now. Let's rewind the clock. 36 hours before that explosive moment shattered congressional decorum, the battle lines were already drawn. But most people missed the warning signs completely. It started 3 months ago when Crockett and Waters found themselves on opposite sides of the House Ethics Committee's most controversial investigation in decades. Waters, the seasoned veteran who'd weathered every political storm since the Reagan era, versus Crockett, the fearless freshman who'd made her name by refusing to play the old games by the old rules. The first crack appeared during a heated CNN panel where Waters dismissed Crockett's reform proposals as naive idealism from someone who doesn't understand how Washington really works. The condescension dripped through the airwaves like poison. Crockett's response was swift and surgical. Maybe it's time Washington learned how the real world really works. Social media erupted. Team Waters versus Team Crockett hashtags dominated political Twitter for days. But behind the public sparring, something deeper was brewing. Capitol Hill insiders whispered about closed-door confrontations, shouting matches in committee rooms, and a growing personal animosity that went far beyond policy disagreements. Then came the MSNBC incident. Waters had just finished another interview defending her family's business dealings when Crockett appeared on the very next segment. "Accountability isn't selective," she said, her voice steady as granite. "It applies to everyone, no exceptions." The host asked what she meant. Crockett just smiled. Some stories tell themselves, others need a little help. The political establishment felt the temperature rising. Waters represented everything the old guard stood for: decades of accumulated power, carefully cultivated connections, and the unspoken understanding that certain lines simply weren't crossed. She'd survived impeachment votes, ethics investigations, and media firestorms that would have ended lesser careers. She was untouchable, invincible, a living legend who'd earned her immunity through sheer longevity and strategic alliance building. Crockett embodied something entirely different. She was the voice of a new generation that refused to worship at the altar of political seniority. Young, brilliant, unafraid, and armed with the kind of moral clarity that made establishment figures nervous. She'd already taken down 2 committee chairs with surgical precision, exposing corruption that everyone knew existed but nobody dared to name. The whispers grew louder. Something big was coming. You could feel it in the hushed conversations outside committee hearings, in the way staffers' eyes darted nervously when both women entered the same room, in the sudden silence that fell whenever their names were meant. Ironed together. Political reporters started making calls. Anonymous sources hinted at explosive revelations and game-changing information. The progressive base sensed blood in the water and began circling. Conservative media prepared for another opportunity to attack Democratic unity. Everyone knew the collision was inevitable. They just didn't know when or where the impact would occur. Waters' allies urged caution. This wasn't some rookie representative they could steamroll with parliamentary procedure and backroom pressure. Crockett had proven she was willing to burn bridges, challenge authority, and expose uncomfortable truths that other politicians preferred to bury. She was dangerous precisely because she had nothing to lose and everything to prove. The storm clouds gathered for weeks. Every public appearance became a chess match. Every committee hearing crackled with unspoken tension. The Capitol Hill press corps could smell the story developing, but nobody could predict exactly how it would unfold. What happens next doesn't just alter their careers, it flips the script on old guard politics for good. But to understand what was truly at stake, you have to dig into the origin stories on both sides. Maxine Waters didn't just climb the political ladder, she rewrote the rules of engagement. For over 3 decades, she's been the undisputed queen of South Central Los Angeles, a force of nature who transformed a local assembly seat into a congressional throne of power that spans from Watts to Washington. She emerged from the fires of the 1992 Los Angeles riots not as a victim, but as a fierce advocate who demanded justice when the world was watching. While other politicians offered empty platitudes, Waters stood in the ashes and declared war on systemic inequality. Her voice became the soundtrack of righteous anger, her presence a guarantee that uncomfortable truth would be spoken in rooms where comfort had always been king. The trajectory was meteoric. State assembly, Congress, committee assignments that lesser politicians could only dream of. Waters mastered the art of political survival through sheer force of will and an uncanny ability to build alliances across ideological lines. She learned early that power in Washington isn't about being liked, it's about being necessary. But power has its shadows, and Waters accumulated both with equal measure. The banking scandals of the early 2000s should have ended her career. Critics accused her of using her position on the House Financial Services Committee to benefit her husband's bank investments. Ethics investigations circled like vultures. Conservative media painted her as the poster child for Democratic corruption. Waters weathered it all with the same defiant energy she'd shown during the riots, dismissing her accusers as racist opportunists trying to silence a strong black woman. "They can investigate me until hell freezes over," she declared from the House floor. "I know who I am and I know what I've done for my community." The investigations faded. The accusations became footnotes. Waters emerged stronger than ever, her base more loyal, her influence more entrenched. She'd learned the most valuable lesson in Washington politics. Survival isn't about being innocent. It's about being indispensable. Her family businesses prospered as her political star rose. Real estate deals that seemed to align perfectly with upcoming infrastructure projects. Banking relationships that weathered economic storms with suspicious ease. Government contracts that found their way to companies with familiar last names. When reporters asked questions, Waters' response was always the same. "My family works hard and earns everything they get." The pattern repeated itself through decades of accumulated power. Waters developed an armor of righteous indignation that deflected criticism like bullets off steel. She positioned herself as the victim of racist attacks whenever ethics questions arose, transforming potential scandals into rallying cries for her supporters. Her congressional office became a family enterprise. Staff positions filled by relatives, consulting contracts awarded to companies owned by in-laws, campaign funds flowing through a network of interconnected businesses that made forensic accounting a nightmare. But Waters had mastered the art of staying just inside the legal boundaries while maximizing every possible advantage. The arrogance became legendary. During heated committee hearings, she'd dismiss opposing viewpoints with theatrical eye rolls and contemptuous laughter. "I don't have time for that foolishness," became her signature response to criticism. She treated younger Democrats like children who needed to learn their place, and Republicans like enemies who deserved no quarter. Waters built her reputation on being unbreakable. Every scandal made her stronger. Every attack proved her point about systemic racism. Every investigation became evidence of a conspiracy to silence her voice. She was untouchable not because she was innocent, but because she'd convinced her supporters that attacking her was attacking them. The South Central Kingdom she ruled with an iron fist reflected her methods perfectly. Loyalty was rewarded handsomely. Dissent was crushed ruthlessly. Former allies who dared to challenge her found themselves politically exiled, their careers mysteriously stalling, their funding mysteriously disappearing. But kingdoms built on fear and favoritism have structural weaknesses that aren't always visible from the throne. The same family connections that provided strength also created vulnerabilities. The same defensive strategies that repelled past attacks also prevented honest self-examination. On the outside, unbreakable, but behind the scenes, a family secret smolders. The irony was perfect. Waters had spent decades positioning herself as the champion of accountability, demanding transparency from banks, corporations, and political opponents. She'd built her brand on moral outrage, righteous anger, and unwavering principles. But power has a way of corrupting even the most righteous causes, and time has a way of exposing even the most carefully guarded secrets. But every titan faces their challenger, and Jasmine Crockett's story runs just as deep. Jasmine Crockett's story begins where most political fairy tales end, with rejection, humiliation, and the crushing weight of a system designed to keep people like her on the outside looking in. She wasn't born into political royalty. No family connections paved her path to power. No inherited wealth smoothed the rough edges of ambition. Crockett earned every inch of ground she gained through pure grit, relentless determination, and an unshakable belief that justice wasn't negotiable. Growing up in St. Louis, she watched her grandmother clean office buildings at night to pay for law school textbooks during the day. 3 generations of women who refused to accept limitations, who transformed obstacles into stepping stones, who understood that change doesn't come from asking politely, it comes from demanding what's right and backing up those demands with uncompromising action. Law school was supposed to be her ticket to respectability, but Crockett discovered early that respectability and justice don't always live at the same address. While her classmates networked at country club events, she spent weekends providing free legal services to immigrant families facing deportation. While others pursued prestigious corporate internships, she fought eviction notices for single mothers and wrongful termination cases for workers who dared to organize. The scars accumulated quickly. Late nights in Lisaunitz. Gallade clinics taught her that the system's failures weren't accidents, they were features. She learned to recognize the subtle ways power protected itself, the institutional barriers designed to exhaust reformers before they could make real change. Her first major victory came at 28 when she took on a massive housing discrimination case that seasoned civil rights attorneys wouldn't touch. The evidence was clear, but the defendants had connections, resources, and the kind of legal firepower that usually intimidated challengers into settlement negotiations. Crockett spent 18 months living on instant noodles and borrowed law library access, building an airtight case that corporate lawyers couldn't dismantle. The courtroom victory made headlines, but the real triumph happened afterward. Dozens of families who'd been systematically excluded from homeownership finally got keys to front doors. Children who'd been crammed into substandard apartments gained bedrooms with windows. Crockett learned that winning wasn't just about legal precedent, it was about human dignity. Dallas politics came calling, but not with open arms. The local Democratic establishment viewed her as a dangerous outsider who didn't understand how things worked. They offered her symbolic positions on meaningless committees, hoping to contain her energy within manageable boundaries. Crockett politely declined and announced her candidacy for state legislature instead. The campaign was brutal. Establishment Democrats quietly funded her primary opponent. Corporate interests poured money into attack ads questioning her experience and temperament. Political consultants whispered that she was too aggressive, too uncompromising, too divisive for effective governance. Crockett responded by organizing the most sophisticated grassroots campaign Texas had seen in decades. She knocked on doors in neighborhoods other politicians ignored. She held town halls and community centers where Spanish and English mixed freely in passionate discussions about healthcare, education, and economic opportunity. She listened to stories that never made it into policy papers and transformed personal struggles into legislative priorities. Election night delivered a landslide victory that sent shockwaves through the political establishment. Crockett didn't just win, she redrew the map of what was possible for candidates who refused to play by the old rules. Her state legislature tenure became a masterclass in strategic disruption. She authored bills that other Democrats considered too controversial to support, then used media savvy and grassroots pressure to force public votes that exposed who really stood with working families. Ethics reform, police accountability, healthcare access, immigration protection. Issues that establishment politicians preferred to handle with symbolic gestures became legislative battles where compromise meant abandoning the people who needed protection most. The Washington establishment noticed, but they noticed the wrong things. They saw her ability to raise money, mobilize voters, and generate media coverage. They missed the deeper truth. Crockett had spent her entire career learning how power actually worked, not the civics textbook version, but the ugly reality of who gets protected and who gets sacrificed. Her congressional campaign was different. National Democratic leaders wanted her in Washington, but on their terms. Corporate donors offered support with subtle strings attached. Progressive organizations promised endorsements in exchange for moderated positions on sensitive issues. Crockett accepted the support and ignored the conditions. Congress revealed the scope of the challenge immediately. The same institutional corruption she'd fought in courtrooms and state committees existed at the federal level, but with higher stakes and more sophisticated cover stories. Veterans like Waters controlled key committees not just through seniority, but through elaborate networks of mutual protection that made challenging individual members politically suicidal. But Crockett had learned something essential during her years of fighting impossible battles. The most dangerous opponents weren't the obvious enemies. They were the allies who used noble rhetoric to justify questionable actions. She'd spent her entire career watching powerful people claim moral authority while quietly compromising the principles they publicly championed. She never shied from battle, but this showdown would test her like never before. The Waters situation crystallized everything she'd learned about power, corruption, and the price of speaking truth. This wasn't just about one politician's family secrets. It was about whether the progressive movement would police itself or protect its own, regardless of the cost. Armed with truth, and a secret even Waters didn't think would see daylight, Crockett prepared for the clash. The tension had been simmering all morning, but when Waters took the microphone at 2:47 p.m., you could feel the temperature spike 20 degrees. Her opening statement was classic Waters, theatrical, commanding, designed to dominate the room through sheer force of personality. "We're here to discuss ethics and accountability," she declared, her voice carrying the weight of 3 decades in Congress. "And I want to be very clear about something. There are those in this chamber who confuse inexperience with integrity, who mistake grandstanding for governance." The verbal shot landed exactly where Waters intended. Cr. Crockett's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, but she didn't take the bait. Not yet. Waters continued her performance, weaving between policy positions and thinly veiled personal attacks. Some people think that because they've won one election, they understand how this institution works. They think they can tear down what took generations to build. Her eyes found Crockett across the room. They think they know better than people who've been fighting these battles since before they were born. The audience felt it. That electric moment when professional courtesy starts cracking under personal animosity. Congressional hearings have their own unspoken rules, invisible boundaries that separate policy disagreement from character assassination. Waters was dancing right along that line with the confidence of someone who'd never faced consequences for crossing it. Crockett's turn at the microphone arrived like a slow-burning fuse reaching dynamite. She stood with deliberate calm, adjusting her papers with the precision of a surgeon preparing for a delicate operation. When she spoke, her voice was steady as steel. "The gentlewoman from California raises interesting points about experience and institutional knowledge," Crockett began, her tone respectful but carrying an undercurrent that made seasoned political observers lean forward. "I've learned so much from observing how this institution really works, how relationships are built, how favors are traded, how accountability applies differently depending on your seniority. Waters' smile faltered for just a heartbeat. Something in Crockett's delivery suggested this wasn't going to be another predictable exchange of talking points. For instance, Crockett continued, I've learned that some members of this body have very creative interpretations of conflict of interest rules, very creative approaches to family business arrangements, very interesting patterns of government contracts and political donations. The Torsis. E-Room's energy shifted like a thunderstorm building on the horizon. Waters' legendary composure cracked slightly as her left eye twitched, a tell that veteran political reporters recognized as a danger sign. The gentlewoman needs to be very careful about making insinuations without evidence. Waters shot back, her voice harder now, the theatrical warmth replaced by something sharper. Some people specialize in rumor-mongering and character assassination when they can't win on the merits. Oh, I'm not making insinuations, Crockett replied with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. I believe in facts, documentation, evidence, the kind of transparency the gentlewoman often demands from others. Waters tried to regain control, pivoting back to prepared talking points about progressive unity and shared values. But everyone in the room could sense the shift. The predator had become prey, and she knew it. Her usual confident gestures became slightly forced, her rhythm faltered. The armor of righteous indignation that had protected her for decades suddenly felt heavier, more cumbersome. I think we should focus on the real issues facing our communities, Waters said, attempting to redirect the conversation to safer ground, not engage in petty political theater designed to generate social media clips. That's when Crockett's expression changed completely. The respectful facade melted away, replaced by something colder, more determined. She leaned slightly forward, her voice dropping just enough to make everyone strain to listen. Social media clips, she repeated slowly as if tasting the words. You know, it's interesting you mention social media, because these days, information travels so fast. Documents get shared, photos get circulated, family connections get exposed. Waters' face went pale. For the first time in decades of political combat, Maxine Waters looked genuinely afraid. The room fell silent except for the mechanical hum of cameras and the scratch of reporters' pens racing across notebooks. The war of words reached a fever pitch, until Crockett chose her moment. Since we're talking about accountability, Crockett said, her gaze locking onto Waters with laser precision, maybe we should discuss what accountability actually looks like. And then, in front of the world, she unleashed the revelation nobody saw coming. Should I mention what really happened at the Waters home last summer? The words hung in the air like a loaded gun. Nobody saw coming. Waters' face drained of color so quickly you could watch her legendary confidence evaporate in real time. Her mouth opened slightly, then closed, then opened again. The first time in 3 decades anyone had witnessed Maxine Waters at a complete loss for words. But Crockett wasn't finished, not even close. She reached into her folder with deliberate precision, every movement calculated for maximum psychological impact. The rustling of papers sounded like thunder in the dead silence. Cameras zoomed in on her hands as she lifted a single document, just one sheet of paper that somehow carried the weight to topple a political dynasty. You see, Crockett continued, her voice carrying the calm authority of someone who holds all the cards, accountability isn't just about what we do in public. It's about what happens when we think nobody's watching. Waters tried to interrupt. I object to this character assassination. Ma'am. Crockett's interruption was surgical, respectful, but absolute. I haven't said anything yet that requires an objection. I'm simply asking a question about accountability. Surely you support accountability? The trap was perfect. Waters could either allow the evolution to continue or appear to oppose the very principle she'd spent the morning defending. Her political instincts, honed by decades of survival, screamed danger from every direction. Crockett let the silence stretch, holding the document like a conductor's baton. Last July 15th, your nephew Marcus Waters, who has received over $2.3 million in contracts from organizations you've publicly endorsed, hosted a fundraising event at your Hancock Park residence. The first murmur rippled through the audience. Reporters' fingers flew across keyboards, already crafting the headlines that would break the internet in minutes. The event raised money for what was described as community development initiatives. Crockett continued, her voice steady as granite. Very noble, very inspiring, the kind of grassroots organizing we all support. Waters found her voice, though it sounded strained, desperate. Family members are allowed to engage in political activities. Absolutely, Crockett agreed with a smile that could cut glass. But here's what's interesting about that particular evening. She lifted the document higher, letting the cameras catch every detail. The room leaned forward as one organism, sensing the kill shot approaching. The guest list included 7 bank executives currently under federal investigation for predatory lending practices, 4 defense contractors seeking approval for projects in your district, and 3 real estate developers who've been accused of displacing low-income families from the very communities this fundraiser was supposed to help. The explosion was instantaneous. Gasps erupted from the gallery. Chairs scraped against marble floors as people shot to their feet. Camera flashes strobed like lightning as photographers captured Waters' face crumbling in real time. "Lies!" Waters shouted, her legendary composure fina, belly shattering completely. "These are baseless accusations from someone who—" "I have photos," Crockett said simply. The 3 words hit like a nuclear bomb. Total silence descended on the chamber, broken only by the mechanical click of cameras and the frantic tapping of phone screens as the revelation raced across social media at light speed. Crockett reached into her folder again, this time producing a series of photographs with the casual confidence of someone who'd prepared for this moment for months. Photos of the attendees, photos of the checks being written, photos of the private meetings that happened in your living room while your neighbors thought they were supporting community development. Waters tried to stand, wobbled, and gripped the table for support. The Iron Lady of South Central Los Angeles looked suddenly fragile, suddenly human, suddenly vulnerable in a way that 3 decades of political warfare had never managed to achieve. The total amount raised that evening was $1.7 million, Crockett continued with the relentless precision of a prosecuting attorney delivering a closing argument. 63% of that money came from the very interests you've spent your career claiming to fight against. The crowd erupted into complete chaos. Supporters screamed accusations of racism and character assassination. Critics roared approval and demands for investigation. The gavel pounded uselessly as parliamentary order dissolved into pure human emotion. But through it all, Crockett remained perfectly calm, watching the hurricane she'd unleashed with the serene satisfaction of someone who knew exactly what they were doing. She'd studied Waters for months, learned her patterns, identified her weaknesses, and chosen this moment with surgical precision. Waters tried one last desperate counterattack. "This is a coordinated smear campaign." "No, ma'am," Crockett interrupted with quiet authority. "This is accountability." The room fell silent again, waiting for the final blow. "Because while you were hosting champagne toasts with bank executives, 3 families in your own district lost their homes to the same predatory practices. While you were taking photos with defense contractors, veterans in Watts couldn't get basic health care. While you were promising community development, the developers at your party were drawing up plans to gentrify the neighborhoods you claimed to represent." The devastation was complete. Waters sat down heavily, her face gray, her hands shaking slightly as she stared at the table. The woman who'd survived every political scandal, weathered every investigation, and emerged stronger from every attack had finally met her match. Social media exploded instantly. #Watersgate trended within minutes. Video clips of the exchange raced across Twitter, TikTok, and Instagram faster than campaign staffers could respond. Cable news interrupted regular programming for breaking coverage. The political world stopped to watch a legend fall in real time. Sometimes all it takes is one truth, spoken at the right moment, to bring the walls crashing down. Crockett carefully placed her documents back in the folder, her mission accomplished with surgical precision. Waters sat in stunned silence, probably calculating how much of her empire could be salvaged from the wreckage. The audience continued its chaotic chorus of shock, outrage, and vindication. The world reeled, but the aftershocks were only just beginning. Within seconds of Crockett's bombshell revelation, the digital world exploded into chaos. The first Twitter clips appeared before the gavel had even stopped pounding. Shaky phone recordings of the exchange raced across every platform faster than campaign damage control teams could respond. Waters exposed shot to the #1 trending topic within 4 minutes. The hashtag gained 127,000 mentions in the first hour alone, with video clips generating millions of views before evening news broadcasts could even begin their coverage. TikTok creators were already remixing the audio over dramatic music, turning Waters' stunned silence into the soundtrack of political accountability. The memes came next, brutal and instant. Waters' shocked expression became the new face of consequences finding you. Side-by-side photos of her confident entrance versus her devastated exit spawned thousands of reaction images. When the receipts arrive, became the caption heard around the internet, with Crockett's calm determination transformed into the ultimate symbol of bringing proof to the fight. But the real shockwaves hit when the political establishment started reacting in real time. Progressive icon Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez broke her usual social media pattern, posting within 20 minutes. "Accountability isn't partisan. It's essential. Thank you at Rep Crockett for showing us what courage looks like." The tweet gained 2.3 million views in 2 hours. On the other side, conservative commentators who'd spent years attacking Waters suddenly found themselves in the bizarre position of defending her civil liberties while simultaneously celebrating her downfall. Tucker Carlson's team scrambled to book Crockett for an exclusive interview, recognizing the ratings goldmine of a progressive hero taking down progressive royalty. The Congressional Black Caucus faced an impossible choice. Waters had been their dean, their elder stateswoman, their fierce protector against racist attacks for decades. But the evidence was undeniable, the photos were damning, and the moral clarity was crushing. Within hours, 3 CBC members had issued carefully worded statements calling for transparency and accountability from all our colleagues. Cable news networks cleared their evening schedules. CNN led with "Waters under fire, family corruption exposed." Fox News countered with "Democrat civil war, rising star destroys veteran." MSNBC struggled with the narrative, their hosts visibly torn between defending a progressive icon and embracing the accountability their audience demanded. The financial markets noticed immediately. Bank stocks mentioned in Crockett's revelation dropped in after-hours trading. Defense contractors scrambled to issue statements distancing themselves from any Waters family connections. Real estate developers quietly began scrubbing their websites of any references to community partnerships. But the human reactions cut deeper than political calculations. In Waters' own district, longtime supporters gathered on street corners and in community centers, watching the clips on repeat with expressions of betrayal and confusion. Maria Gonzalez, a 67-year-old activist who'd volunteered for Waters for 15 years, spoke for many. "I defended her through everything, every attack, every investigation. Now I feel like a fool." The generational divide became immediately apparent. Older Democrats spoke of loyalty, context, and the need to protect Black women from racist attacks. Younger progressives saw vindication of their suspicions about establishment corruption and proof that no one should be above accountability. Social media influencers with millions of followers began picking sides. The conversation spread beyond political circles into mainstream culture. Celebrities who'd never commented on congressional hearings suddenly found themselves weighing in on corruption, accountability, and the price of challenging power. International media picked up the story within hours. The BBC led their America segment with "U.S. Congresswoman exposes colleague's family corruption." European news outlets framed it as another example of American political dysfunction, while African news organizations highlighted the symbolic importance of a young Black woman holding a veteran Black politician accountable. The ripple effects reached every level of democratic politics. Fundraising events scheduled for the following week were quietly canceled. Committee assignments came under review. Leadership positions that seemed secure suddenly looked vulnerable. The entire progressive ecosystem began recalibrating around a new reality where even the most protected figures could face consequences. Progressive organizations faced their own reckoning. Groups that had endorsed Waters for decades now confronted angry members demanding explanations. Donate buttons came down from websites. Endorsement lists got quietly edited. The infrastructure of political protection that had shielded Waters for years crumbled in real time. Local news stations across the country dispatched reporters to gather reactions from Waters' constituents, Crockett's supporters, and random Americans processing the dramatic confrontation. The story had transcended Washington politics to become a national conversation about power, corruption, and courage. The crowd's eruption was only the beginning. A nation started asking questions. Questions about who else might be hiding similar secrets. Questions about whether other establishment figures would face the same accountability. Questions about what kind of leaders deserved their trust and what kind of courage it took to speak truth to power, even when that power wore a friendly face. But beyond the viral storm, what does this moment mean for who we are and who we want to be? 3 days after the Rev. Elation that shattered congressional decorum, Jasmine Crockett sat in her modest Dallas office, surrounded by stacks of letters from constituents across the country. The messages arrived by the thousands, from teachers in Maine, mechanics in Montana, small business owners in South Carolina, all sharing the same sentiment. Finally, someone had the courage to speak truth to power. But Crockett understood something deeper than viral fame or political celebrity. This wasn't about her versus Waters. This was about the soul of progressive politics, about whether movements built on moral authority could police themselves when that authority was betrayed. "We have a choice to make as a people," she said during a quiet interview that week, her voice carrying the same steady determination that had commanded a congressional hearing. "We can either demand accountability from everyone, or we can demand it from no one. There's no middle ground when it comes to integrity." The contrast couldn't have been starker. While Waters retreated into silence, surrounded by lawyers and crisis management consultants, Crockett opened her doors to every journalist, every podcast, every platform that would listen. She didn't hide behind talking points or deflect with accusations of unfair treatment. She simply told the truth and let the truth speak for itself. "People ask me if I was scared," she reflected. "Of course I was scared. But I was more scared of what we become if we stay silent when we know better." The moral calculus was brutally simple. Waters had built her career on demanding transparency from banks, corporations, and Republican politicians. She'd thundered about accountability, justice, and the need to protect vulnerable communities from predatory practices. But when those same principles threatened her own family's financial interests, she'd chosen silence over service, loyalty over law, power over principle. Crockett forced America to confront an uncomfortable question: what good are our values if we only apply them to our enemies? The fallout revealed everything wrong with political tribalism. Waters's defenders didn't dispute the evidence. They couldn't. Instead, they attacked the messenger, questioned her motives, and suggested that loyalty to the party mattered more than loyalty to the principles that defined the party. But something beautiful emerged from the wreckage. Across the country, ordinary citizens began demanding more from their representatives. Town halls that had devolved into scripted theater became genuine forums for accountability. Voters started asking harder questions about campaign finance, family business connections, and conflicts of interest that had been politely ignored for decades. The generational divide became a generational awakening. Young progressives who'd been dismissed as naive idealists suddenly found their voices validated by undeniable evidence. They hadn't been wrong to demand better. They hadn't been unfair to expect integrity. They'd been right all along to believe that movements claiming moral authority should actually live by moral standards. "This isn't about destroying careers or ending political lives," Crockett explained to critics who accused her of divisive grandstanding. "This is about saving our democracy from the corruption that destroys trust between citizens and their government." The silence from Waters spoke volumes. No press conferences, no explanations, no accountability for the accountability advocate, just lawyers, damage control, and the desperate hope that time would heal wounds that truth had opened. But time doesn't heal corruption, only consequences do. The broader lesson transcended partisan politics entirely. In boardrooms and classrooms, in community organizations and family dinner conversations, people began asking themselves the same question Crockett had posed to Waters: what happens when we think nobody's watching? Character isn't what you do when cameras are rolling and crowds are cheering. Character is what you do in private moments when you think your choices won't be discovered, when you believe your position protects you from consequences, when you convince yourself that your good intentions justify questionable methods. Waters had failed that test spectacularly, but more importantly, Crockett had passed it brilliantly. In the end, legacies are made, or broken, by the truths we face. The young congresswoman from Dallas had proven that courage isn't about being fearless. It's about being more afraid of staying silent than speaking up, more afraid of corruption than confrontation, more afraid of betraying your principles than challenging your allies. She'd shown America what leadership looks like when it chooses integrity over comfort, accountability over loyalty, and truth over power. The viral moment would fade, the hashtags would disappear, the memes would be forgotten, but the precedent would endure. The standard would remain. The expectation that public servants serve the public, not themselves, not their families, not their political interests, had been reinforced by someone brave enough to enforce it. And if you think this was just one dramatic exchange, think again. History is watching. So there you have it, the moment when Jasmine Crockett revealed Waters' family's secret and the crowd absolutely erupted. What started as another routine congressional hearing became a defining moment that proved accountability isn't negotiable, no matter how powerful you are or how long you've held that power. The secret wasn't hidden anymore. The truth couldn't be buried. And a young congresswoman from Dallas showed America what courage looks like when it faces down corruption. Even when that corruption wears a familiar face and claims noble intentions, Waters' silence speaks louder than any defense ever could. When you build your career on demanding transparency from others, you don't get to hide behind lawyers and crisis managers when accountability comes knocking at your own door. The moral victory belongs to everyone who believes that principles matter more than politics, that integrity trumps influence, and that truth always finds a way to surface. But this story isn't just about one explosive revelation or one politician's downfall. It's about what happens when ordinary citizens demand extraordinary leadership. It's about refusing to accept that's just how politics works as an excuse for behavior we'd never tolerate from ourselves. Crockett didn't just reveal a family secret, she revealed what's possible when we stop protecting the powerful and start protecting our principles. She showed us that change doesn't come from Washington down, it comes from citizens up, from people who refuse to stay silent when they know better. The crowd erupted because they recognized something they'd been hungry for. Someone willing to speak truth to power, regardless of the consequences. Someone who understood that loyalty to the people must always come before loyalty to the party. This is your moment, your voice, your choice. If this story moved you, if it inspired you, if it reminded you why accountability matters, then don't just watch, act. Share this story. Demand better from your representatives. Ask the hard questions. Support leaders who choose courage over comfort. Because if we can accomplish this much with one truth told at the right moment, imagine what we could accomplish together when we all decide that integrity isn't negotiable. The crowd erupted. The truth emerged. Now it's your turn to make some noise.